Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I will be doing a book review on one of the most anticipated releases of the year for me, and that would of course be Carrie Soto Is Back by Jenkins Reid, one of my all-time favorite authors. This is now my second favorite book with Carrie in the title. You could probably take a pretty good guess at what number one would be. Anyway, enough joking aside, I really enjoyed this book, but I did not give it 5 stars like I've given most of her books 5 stars. I actually gave this one 4.5 stars, so it wasn't as good as, say, like Daisy Jones and the Six, or Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, or Malibu Rising. I love those books. For this book, I really did enjoy it, but I did have some minor complaints with it that kept it from being 5 stars. Once I read all of her books, I do plan on making a ranking video where I rank all 8 of her books. Of course, Daisy Jones is my favorite, but after that, it'll be kind of hard to rank all of them. I still have 2 more to read from her, Forever Interrupted and After I Do, which I think are her 2 earliest books. So I still need to read that, and then I will have read all of her books, and that'll be a fun video to rank all of them. Where this one will be fairly interesting, because like I've said, I've given a bunch of her books 5 stars, but I settled on 4.5 for this one, so it'll probably be actually lower. I know a lot of people love this book, and so did I, but like I said, I do have some minor complaints with it, and I will get to that in the review. So enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So what is this book about? Of course, it's about Carrie Soto, obviously, and it starts in the present timeline where she is watching a tennis match, and she's essentially watching a really great tennis player take away her all-time record, and it's about her committing to coming out of retirement to reclaim her title as the greatest tennis player of all time. And after that initial chapter, like a prologue, it jumps back into the past where we follow her upbringing with her dad, who is also her tennis coach, and essentially we get the story of how she became the greatest tennis player to ever play the game. So that's basically what this book is about. I'm going to keep this review as non-spoilery as possible because I obviously want people to read it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about actually what happens in this book. I'm just going to give my overall impression and my overall thoughts on the book as a whole. So first off, the main reason why I love this book so much is, of course, Carrie Soto. She's a fantastic character. She's very determined and very competitive, which simultaneously is her biggest strength and her biggest weakness, her biggest flaw. Like, obviously, being competitive in tennis, right, is good for her job, her occupation, right? And she does eventually become the greatest tennis player to ever live. But at the same time, it is her flaw because while she is so determined to be so great at tennis, other aspects of her life struggle, like relationship-wise and just having friends, right? So at the same time, like Jenkins Reid just does such a good job with that dynamic of having her biggest attribute also be her biggest flaw. And of course, with that dynamic comes a lot of just outstanding character moments with Carrie Soto and her interactions with the people in her life, including her dad and some other characters that I won't mention here because I want to keep this as non-spoilery as possible. Having said that, however, my first real complaint with this book, and one of the major complaints I had with the book, is that even though there are a lot of outstanding character moments, a lot of them feel rushed for me. Like, you get so much jam-packed into this book that a lot of the times the chapters just go by super quickly, even though they are really good. I wish she would have stayed in the scene more because there's just some significant stuff that happens to her in her life. And I won't say that Taylor Jenkins Reid just brushes past it, but I wish she would have stayed more in the scene and just in the moment with that moment for her. Because in her other books, she does that brilliantly. Like Malibu Rising, there's just so many just poignant moments where she just kind of sits in the scene and just sits with the character's thoughts. In this one, it just kind of felt too rushed, like too quick. And there's just it's a short book, right? But there's so much that happens in here that I wish she would have either just fleshed out a couple of them a bit more or just lengthened the book. And I think it would have impacted me a little bit more, because there were some, very impactful scenes in here. But if she would have stayed with it a little bit longer, I think they would have impacted me a lot more than they did. But again, having said that, there are just so many outstanding moments in this book that it's hard to ignore how great this book actually is. And with all of those great character moments comes great messages and themes. There's a lot of great messages and themes with this book. There's a lot of scenes in this book with Carrie that highlight the fact that even though she's doing a terrific job at her occupation of playing tennis to, the top level, like she's clearly one of the greatest tennis players ever, like she's not being judged on her ability and her skill set to play tennis. She's being judged on a lot of other stuff that have nothing to do with tennis, right? She's being judged on like what she's wearing, who she's dating, like her demeanor, like after the game, right? Just a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with actually playing tennis. And she gets very frustrated. Like, I wish people would judge me based on my talent and my skills and my outcome of the games, but they're focusing on all this other crap that has nothing to do with tennis. And obviously that's reflecting on women even today, like in general, like people or women are just judged on stuff that shouldn't even matter, right? And Taylor Jenkins Reid just does that brilliantly with Carrie Soto. There's also talk about what it truly means to be the GOAT, and not like the GOAT animal, but the greatest of all time. It's an acronym, people. Like, what does it mean to actually be the greatest of all time, the GOAT? And as a sports fan, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm wearing a Seahawks jersey, and the Seahawks beat the Broncos. Oh yeah, oh yeah. As a sports fan, I'm all about discussing like the greatest of all time and like what it actually means. And her dad, who, like I said, is her tennis coach, he explains to her, like, there's so many ways you can interpret being the greatest of all time. You could judge, someone just off of the amount of matches they won, or the amount of grand slams that they won, or just like in their lifetime, what did they do, or just longevity, right? There's so many ways you can judge a player or just, an athlete, like on who is the greatest of all time. And of course, one of the biggest debates is like basketball, right? Who is the greatest of all time? Most people would say Michael Jordan, even though he doesn't have the most rings. He has 6 rings, but there's a lot of people who have more 6 rings. Like Bill Russell has 11. Why isn't he considered the greatest of all time? Michael Jordan didn't score the most points of all time. That would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? So what makes Michael Jordan the GOAT, even though he doesn't have those accolades like other people do? So I love sports. So talking about that, I had a really fun time, with that message as well. And speaking of her father, I really liked their dynamic. I really liked their chemistry in the story. And I really liked how, as her coach, he really tried his best to, instill this, winning attitude, but also when she kind of gets a little fixated on winning, like winning is the only important thing. He tries to pull her back and say, look what you've accomplished already. Like, you've had a great career. But for her, it's just like, I want to be the greatest of all time. So I really enjoyed their relationship and their interactions, whether it was very sweet and heartfelt or even them going through struggles at some point in this story. So yeah, their character dynamic and character father and daughter relationship was very well done, in my opinion. The one thing that I did not like about his character and their interactions, and this might be my biggest complaint with the book in general, is that, he does speak a lot of Spanish. And it's one thing to like have a character speak like a random thing of dialogue here and there with Spanish. It sucks though, because obviously I and a lot of people don't speak Spanish, so we're not going to know every single thing that the character is saying. A lot of the times though, you can pick up on it with context clues, like, oh, like he's calling her his daughter or he's calling her beautiful or whatever. But then there's moments in this book where there's just lines of just Spanish. Like there's a moment in this story at a very critical moment where there's 5 lines of Spanish dialogue. I have no idea what they're saying. And it kind of took me out of the story, because I'm like, it's a very important scene in the story and they're speaking Spanish. I have no idea what they're saying. So, you have to eventually go look it up or try to figure it out with context clues. But at the same time, it just took me out of the story. And there's lots of moments like that in here where they're speaking Spanish. I don't know what they're saying. So that kind of drew me out of the story a bit. And I totally get that it's very realistic, because people who can speak 2 languages often do that. Like, they'll go in and out of the languages, and that's fine. But as a reader who really only speaks and knows English, it's very tough with a book like this, because you get to certain scenes and they're speaking just nothing but Spanish. And I'm just like, I don't know what they're saying. Why should I care about this? So that was probably my biggest complaint with the book. Also, while there are a lot of great side and secondary characters in this book, it's obviously Carrie Soto's story, and she's the main reason why you read this book. It's the main reason why I love this book. The side characters are good, but they don't get a lot of screen time often, and it's, like I said, it's just Carrie's book. I wish we would have fleshed out a bit more of the side characters, especially a character that gets introduced as her rival. I wish they would have had a lot more interactions. You really don't get a true interaction with them until way later on in the book, and I wish we would have gotten more of those, because that was one of my favorite parts of the book. And obviously this book is dealing with sports, right? Tennis matches. So a big part of sports is rivalry and, just coming at each other, right? So I wish we would have got more interactions with them and just shit talking each other, right? Like, that would have been really cool to have that like throughout the book. Also, one thing that I usually praise Taylor Jenkins Reid on is her ability to write really good humor and really good dramatic scenes, and just very easily be able to flip back and forth between the two. With this book, there is some humor, but not nearly as much as her other books that I've read by her. So that it's not a complaint necessarily. It's just I wish there would have been a bit more humor mixed with all of the dramatic stuff that happens in the book. Also, I have another complaint. It's not necessarily with the book at all, like with Taylor Jenkins Reid, but the audiobook. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's audiobooks, especially Daisy Jones and the Six, which is narrated by a full cast. That's one of the reasons why I love that story so much. And so when I picked up the audiobook for this, I was expecting it to be a full cast, and it does say that with the Audible thing, but it's not really a full cast. You get, I'd say, like 95% of this book read by one narrator who is narrating Carrie Soto's story. And then the full cast kind of comes in and does these random like sports radio talk interludes. Like, those are the full cast elements. I thought this book was going to be a full cast, like every character gets their own narrator, but that's not what happened. So I felt kind of gypped about that. Like, I was expecting a full cast narration, and that's not what I got. So I was a little salty about that. So even though a lot of this review has been me complaining about a lot of it, it's all minor stuff. A lot of it didn't like severely take me out of the story, and it didn't severely diminish my enjoyment of the book. Like I said, I did give it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed Carrie Soto. She's one of the best characters that Taylor Jenkins Reid has ever written. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was really good. I just had like a couple minor complaints, maybe more than a couple, but some stuff that took me out of it a little bit, and it didn't quite land for me at being a 5-star book. But I still immensely enjoyed this book, and for anybody who's a fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid, I would highly recommend you go read it. It's very good. Carrie Soto Is Back. It's excellent. All right, so that is my review for Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest book, Carrie Soto Is Back. What did you guys think of my review? Also, have you read this before, or are you excited to read it? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and go join the Bookish Drummer Discord, where the Stephen King Readathon will take place in the month of October. Competitive, points-based readathon. It'll be a lot of fun. Also, go check out my Patreon if you want to go support me there. And I also have my Amazon wish list down below if you'd like to buy me a book. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day. Jesus.